Yeah, well, that's what I do usually. Yeah.
Who am I to tell anybody how to do their art? Yeah. So our talks are continuing this season on what it means to live a life of freedom from any form of discord. And I kind of want to circle it today with this idea of what it means to be home in the world. And it's kind of an interesting thought. How to be at home in a world that is passing? You know, however we want to look at that and however we want to define it. But the reality is, the world that we know is forever passing. And whether that means, you know, the culture, the system, the whatever, the universe, thermonuclear destruction at the end of time when basically the sun goes out. However, I don't know. I can go wild on that. But I just, and I won't go that far. But I want to start with this, it's kind of this ritual that I do every Sunday morning. And it's kind of a two-part ritual. I usually get up before the sunrise. I try to get up I'm always up before the sunrise, it seems. But I'm up before the sunrise and I go sit in my hot tub, or our hot tub. And one reason I love to do this is because Temecula has a light pollution issue. But there is the possibility of seeing some of the brighter stars and planets. And so, early in the morning at 4 or 5 in the morning, you can see the morning star. You can see Venus. You can see Mercury when he's as a morning star. And lately, now you can see Jupiter early in the morning. So this incredible opportunity to see these stars is just something that has thrilled me. When we talked about what lures you, what inspires you, what does whatever it does, to me, the starry world always gets it for me. It always has. Thank you. Yes, because this one. The other part of it is just the ritual itself of sitting in nice warm water and relaxing and just kind of being with my thoughts. And it's a ritual, but it's a ritual that is rich in symbols. And there's something about this symbolic experience that I want to talk a little bit about today. For some people, they know that this weekend is known as the festival of Lunacia or Lammas. It's the midpoint between the summer solstice and the autumnal equinox. In that midpoint, it was known as first harvest. So it's the time when the first harvests come in. So it's a celebration and a recognition of the healing power of grains. But there's also the transient part of that too, because there's the abundance of all that is coming, but also from my Welsh nationalism, there's that national identity that I don't know if I have a Welsh national identity, that's a bit lofty, but my connection to maybe my Welsh heritage. There's this idea that even in the fullness of this, what we know is that John Barleycorn must die. And anybody who is an aficionado of Maker's Mark understands what that means. So, but there's this idea then that there's a rhythm, and the rhythm reveals itself in ritual. And the rituals are rich in symbols. And so it really comes down to, for me, the question of how do I live a spiritual life? How do I live a symbolic life? How do I live a life with ritual that connects me to deeper rhythms, deeper cycles that are kind of going on? Because, the power of a symbol is that one of the things that it does is it serves the purpose of recognition. When we recognize something, it's knowing something that we're already acquainted with. And the beauty and the power of recognition or knowing something that we're already acquainted with is that it sort of elicits this sense of permanence in a world that is extremely transient. We live in a culture that is dominated by this idea of production. And, production breeds this sense of transiency. I was thinking about this earlier, to me, this whole idea that we have, even in our language, of what it means to live a productive life, a life that really is transient. Because one of the beauties of ritual and symbol, and I invite you to think of maybe a holiday that is familiar to you, is it gives us the opportunity of having a sense of being home in the world. So rituals, symbols, those kinds of things, they create an environment of recognition of knowing something again, being acquainted with something. That brings us this sense of permanence. And that sense of permanence, as opposed to the transientness of it all, kind of gives us this sense of where we are. And in many ways, to celebrate ritual, to look at the world symbolically, to seek to find our sense of rhythm in the greater rhythms of things, is kind of the antidote to the sense of alienation that many of us kind of feel living in the world, and kind of puts things in perspectives. There's this wonderful story of a parable in the Gospel of Luke, and it's only in Luke, interestingly enough. It's not in the other Gospels. And in the story, it is said that a man who had worked hard and gathered his riches and had all these things, he kind of got all his ducks in a row. He looks around at all of his possessions and all of his wealth, and he says, this is really a cool thing. What am I going to do? I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to tear down my old barn, and I'm going to tear down my old storage, and I'm going to build bigger and better storage and more room, and I'm going to create more. And if I do that, then, I'm going to be able to rest on the laurels of all that I've accumulated and how it's going to pay myself off, and I should live a very comfortable life. And oh, by the way, what could possibly go wrong? And Jesus concludes the story by saying he hears the voice of the Holy One who says, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded of you." You fool. You have put all your value into this one idea of how you are supposed to live and gather and create and produce, and yet tonight none of that will make a bit of difference. For tonight your very life is demanded of you. And I think to me, the impact of that parable that Jesus tells speaks to this idea of what are our priorities? How do we, it's not like we're not supposed to do the best that we can and create, and in the Science of Mind text, one of the things that Ernest Holmes talks about in the chapter on mental equivalence is letting go of the idea that somehow or another living in poverty, living with less, and shunning any kind of advancement, that somehow or another that's a more pious or holy life. Because it's really about answering a call that is inviting us, and it's not a one-size-fits-all at all. It's each one of us is called to live this life that we have been invited to participate in. And I want to talk about that in just a few moments. But as I was sitting about this or thinking about this, the life that we live. And the life that we live often is run by archetypes. And what I mean by archetypes, an archetype is sort of a mold or a process by which our life force moves itself. If you think in terms of a riverbed, water is flowing wherever it is going, but when it moves into this riverbed, it finds a direction, it finds an expression, it finds a level of volition and power moving through that particular thing. Albert Pike in his book Morals and Dogma talks about this too. He talks about steam. Steam just left on its own just sort of dissipates. But if you move it into something, it can create power. It can make a train move. It can create energy. It can do all these kinds of things. So that's kind of like what an archetype does. It allows the energy force in us to find the direction or an expression. Does that make sense, what I'm talking about there? I'm not losing it yet? I know I'm going to get swirly here in just a second. But anyway, so I think about that because, an archetype that runs in me, and boy, it has just awoken in me, is the archetype of the orphan. The orphan is the one who is the outsider looking in. It's the one who lives a life apart, is the one who experiences themselves as different. I mean, just think of my profession, for goodness sakes. As a minister is like a perfect example of an orphan archetype because, you're already separate, you're already different by virtue of that. Like, here's an example. Everybody gets called to jury duty. The first thing that they ask you is, what do you do professionally? Minister. The first person who's thanked and excused from jury duty, always me. Because no prosecutor ever wants a minister on their jury, right? Or the other thing is you go, you're maybe at a club, you're at a bar. Club. When was the last decade I was in a club? Okay, but I am someplace, maybe socially doing something, and someone says, and they're talking, and you're laughing, you're joking, doing whatever your case may be, and they say, well, what do you do for a living? And I say, I'm a minister. Man, immediately people clean up their language, they stop talking about the things that they're talking about, or they decide that this is the time that they want to go into confession. So it's, whatever the case may be, there's always a sense of me being separate from wherever I am. One of the reasons I'm so excited about this book study that we're going to endeavor is because, for decades, I've spent time in the imaginal, in the land of, as Tolkien would call, fairy. And I have this yearning to share communally insights and thoughts and reflections on what this looks like. Because I believe that the imaginal, or what Tolkien would call the land of fairy, is a place. It is as real as anything in our experience. When we close our eyes, we enter into it. It is a place that is perhaps not physically present, but it's a place we all go to. And how we strengthen our capacity to do this is through the imagination. So we access the imaginal through the power of the imagination. Carl Jung calls this active meditation. And he says what it is it's a meditation through that arises from the images of our unconscious. Unconscious, not unconscious, unconscious. Another way of saying that is something that we talk about in New Thought as far as mental equivalence. And this goes all the way back to the Hermetic traditions of the ancient world, right? Which is being able to create, as Thomas Troward says, a spiritual prototype in our mind, an image, a system, an outcome, something that we're wanting. And the stronger that we can create that image, what happens is what neuroscience is now teaching us is that our subjective brain will then begin to create a bridge to move us there consciously and unconsciously. So we might call this magic, and magic is really nothing more than applied metaphysics. But what it is it's this capacity to create an image within the imagination, and then by allowing ourselves to meditate on that image, begin to create a pathway to experience the very thing that we're imagining. Make sense? So you may be saying to yourself right now, well, then what you're saying is it's all in your head. Yes, I am. But let me tell you something. inside your head is a very, very, very big place that is limited only by the restraints that you put on it. And the thing of it is in the imaginal world, we are plugging into something that's even more powerful than we even know. You know, the question that I asked today, what lures you, what triggers you, what invites you into something? You know, this is, if you look in myths and legends, there's always some kind of animal or magical thing or something that gets our attention. Or if you want to get all, you know, Hebrew Bible on it, think of the burning bush in the book of Exodus. You know, something that catches our attention, because what creates growth, what stimulates this imaginal in us is amazement, is surprise, is wonder, is awe. And so how do we begin to develop and create that? Because a strong imagination creates the capacity of tapping into the imaginal. The imaginal is a very powerful place. And Tolkien, one of Tolkien's letters, he writes about it. I shared a little bit about this last week. In one of his letters, he talks about there's this pivotal chapter in the Fellowship of the Ring, the book that we're starting this week. In that, he is at this inn called the Prancing Pony. And there's a character in there that is, we later find out, is an extremely important person. And what he says when he wrote this letter, he says, when I was writing that chapter, I had no idea who this person was. Not only did I not know who this person was, but I didn't know why another person, Gandalf, was delayed. And not only did I not know that, I didn't even know who Saruman was. And he's the man writing the book. Because what he says is, you know, he would wait. Artists know this. Mozart talks about this. It's that the story comes to us. We don't construct the story, but we create the space for the story to come to us. Parker Palmer is, who's a fabulous educator. He says this, he says, education is creating this space for learning to happen. It is that capacity to create within ourselves the freedom to allow the imaginal to give to us through the unconscious, which Jung would say taps us into this sort of collective mind or consciousness, information that heretofore we had not known. It's all inside of our head, yes, but the head is a very, very big place. You know, Sigmund Freud had this idea that our life was like a house, and there was a basement, which was the unconscious. And so if we go down into the basement, there's all kinds of rich and interesting kinds of things. And in the basement, there is a door that leads us down to a deeper level, a primal level of sort of the universal unconsciousness. And Jung said, yeah, absolutely. This house has a basement, but it also has an attic. And the attic just opens us up into this whole other realm. Pierre Teilhard would call that the noosphere, this place of wisdom that is there, that is accessible to each and every one of us. So the question then that I invite you to consider is this, is how do we strengthen that muscle? How do we strengthen that capacity to develop mental equivalence, to have a strong imagination, then therefore allows us a greater capacity to enter into fairy or to the imaginal? So, being a strong advocate of reading is one of the ways that we do that, and one of the ways that Tolkien recommended was fantasy. Was reading something other than some self-help book or how to, because all that is production oriented, isn't it? All that is so transient. How to do this in 7 steps, how to do that in 7 steps, how to do this and how to do that. And we're just completely cut off. We're just numb from the neck up because we're not even in touch with what our body is wanting to tell us or what we're feeling or how we access this. And so sometimes the best, you know, there was this, tripping right now because there was this great movie years ago, a million years ago, Al Brooks. It was called King of Hearts. Does anybody remember this movie? King of Hearts. Do you remember this movie? It was one of the most brilliant movies I have ever seen. If you can dig this movie up someplace, it's a trip. It takes place the story of the movie is that it's taking place during the Great War, the First World War, and Al Brooks, who is the character, is sent to spy on this village, which is occupied by the Germans. But the Germans, realizing that they're about to be overrun, evacuate the city. But on their way out, they open up the doors to the asylum, and all the members of the asylum leave the asylum, and they take the roles of the people in the village. And so when Al Brooks arrives there, he sees this fully occupied village, but it's members of the asylum that are running it, and he doesn't know this. But there's this great line. He's standing on the parapet with somebody, and I remember this line. He says, one of the guys that was one of them is speaking to him, and he says, sometimes you need to step out of the situation in order to get the perspective of what's going on. And it's the same thing with immersing ourselves in myths and legends and fantasy and whatever the case may be of literature, because what it's doing is it's taking us out. And Tolkien says that there are three components of fairy or the imaginal that serve us. They are, we read fantasy, we read literature, we immerse ourselves in this for three things: recovery, escape, and consolation. He wrote this on Fairy Stories. Recovery, escape, and consolation. So what does that mean? Recovery. Let me give you a perfect example. How many people are sick to death with what is going on in the world today? How many people, when they read one more time of the American complicity and the Israeli genocide of the Gazas, are not sick to their stomach? How many people look at the corruption of the world, of the government, of elected officials on both sides? When you have someone like Christian Gellibrand so freaked out about somebody who is a different faith and color than her that she makes these horrible statements, not to mention what's being said on the other side. How many people are sick of that? Sometimes we need to step out of that and nurture our soul with beauty, with goodness, with truth. Sometimes we just need to step out of that. It will certainly be waiting for us when we come back. I was reading an article about people that live well over 90 years old. And one of the things that's almost universal in every one of them is that none of them read the news before noon. None of them. So it's a sense of recovering ourselves. The I Ching talks about it as a tactical retreat, when it just feels that sometimes we're pushing against something so much that the wisest thing we can do is just step back. Which brings us to this idea of escape. Something that Tolkien said is, he says, the only people that are against escape are jailers. Right? Because sometimes, if you think about it, if you are held captive by something, maybe you want to consider escaping from it. If you find yourself in the bondage of something, whatever that is, perhaps a moment of escape can feed us, can strengthen us, can work that imaginal muscle. And then consolation. C.K. Chesterton tells this story. He says, we read fantasy not because we believe in dragons. We read fantasy because we believe they can be defeated. And so the consolation is that sometimes a higher wisdom affords us the opportunity to see things different from the perspective that we find ourselves entrenched in. And so my invitation then today is to consider this. Pick up a good book. And if you need a recommendation, I got it. And it's not just Tolkien. I mean, there's some other ones. I got Annie reading this book, Sun House, which is just friggin' brilliant. But pick up a book. Not so much a movie, because movies are more passive, and they really don't develop the imagination as strongly. Write a song, poetry, or listen to music, but something that allows you or creates the space for you to step out, to recover, to escape from everything that's going on, and a sense of consolation that perhaps is there. You know, all the great literature and all the great myths and all the great legends, whether it be the Bhagavad Gita, the Hebrew Bible, or the Christian Bible, or the Dhammapada, or, you know, who are Wicca, whatever, however the case may be, all of them serve a purpose. And the purpose is not because they're teaching science. The purpose is not because there's some literal story there. But all of them are creating within us an imagination of a possibility that can create within us a portal that allows us to access this deep subjective place where, you know, where the Holy One speaks to us, where that thing of inspired comes to us, where doors begin to open, as Emerson said, where heretofore no door even appeared to be. This is really one of those try this at home and see if it works exercises that I'm offering to you. Is to take some time this week and step out. Step out, turn the phone off, turn the television off, turn whatever off that needs to be, and just feed yourself with beauty. Allow yourself to find amazement and surprise and wonder. And I promise you, that will lead you to a sense of connection. It will lead you to a sense of oneness. It will lead you to a place of reverence. And from that place, we are inspired to fulfill who we have been created to be, which are creators of this tragically beautiful place we call Earth, our home, finding ourself and our place in the world. Thank you. Word of the day, I forgot this because I went off on something else. Word of the day, because this is the word I've been pondering. It was that whole Welsh thing that I was talking about. Because, you know, I don't think you should do 23andMe or Ancestry or any of those kinds of things. Ask your soul where you resonate and follow that. So, you know, I really identify with my Italian half, probably because of the food and just because it was so familiar to me. But inside me also is this, as I immerse myself into Tolkien because of what he wrote, is my Welsh roots. And there's this great, beautiful Welsh word. It's called hiraeth. And what hiraeth means is it's a spiritual longing for a home, perhaps one that never was. It's a nostalgia for ancient places to which we cannot return. It's the echo of the lost places of our soul's past and our grief for them. It is the wind and the rocks and the waves. It is nowhere and it is everywhere. Hiraeth, word of the day. There you go.